Hello, Michelle, and welcome to Hands in the Soil podcast. I'm really excited to have you here with me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Hannah. I'm excited to be here too.
You're outside, you have a beautiful tree in the background overhead. So, could you just take us through how did you first get into agriculture and how did you end up being here where you are? I know that you did not start off doing this. So, yeah, could you just tell us a little bit more about your background and what got you here?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I did not start off in agriculture. I started out a suburbanite kid back in the day. My 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 pop was military, and so we moved around a lot. Um, but I guess I've always had some roots. My mom grew up in Michigan on a dairy farm. Uh, the 40s, the late 30s, um, and she was one of four daughters on that farm. And back in the day, Michigan, lots of snow, uphill both ways. She didn't. When she left, she had no desire to go back. But we, as
Mm.
kids, my parents moved around a lot, and so we spent a lot of summers on the farm, my mom's farm, and I just really enjoyed it. I really liked that lifestyle. And then as a kid, my pop was gone a lot. He was in the Navy, but one summer he dug up our backyard, a part of it, a little section, and he and I planted a garden together. And I think there was something about that connection and seeing, like, it was just really simple. It was like radishes, carrots, some watermelon, things that grow really well in Virginia, and just seeing all that come up and being able to pick it and eat it. And then I think spending the time with my pop doing that was really important. It was the only time he had done it, but I continued to try to do it, like, I think every year as a child. And I advanced a little
Mm.
bit. I grew some tomatoes and some other things as well. But knowing that, you know, my mom's people, farming community, big farms, her cousins had 1,000 acres of farms with dairy cattle, soybean, corn was not something that I was going to be able to do. I mean, I was a kid from the suburbs. So, knowing that my life wasn't going to be agricultural background, it was going to be something else. So I did a lot of different things when I was younger, but ultimately I graduated with a degree in engineering, and I pursued that.
Mm.
But at the same time, I was raising a family, and I did, you know, the garden thing. I had always had chickens, and eventually we started processing our own chickens, just really so I could get really good, clean food to my kids, type of thing. Yeah, I that's kind of where it was. I always had, like, I think I wanted to do more, but I didn't see that that was really possible, living how we lived, like more suburb city, maybe a little rural, but still kind of, 1 acre plots or whatever. And then back in the 2010s, I think somewhere around 2012 or 2013, I took a farming class, an urban farming class at Wild Willow. And
Mm.
man, my daughter called that the gateway drug to farming because it just, like, it really lit a fire. It made me realize what small spaces were all about and what you could do in a small space. I just, like, I couldn't look back after that. It grabbed my soul because I think there was a part of me that always wanted to be in that space. Once I was introduced to it and I saw the possibilities, it was just like I never looked. I just couldn't look back. So, I took classes after that. I went to the local community college, Miracosta, and got in, I took their sustainable ag classes. I did that while I was working during the day, taking classes at night. I'm kind of a science person, so I wanted to explore the science of soil a lot more, of growing. And I started, I had always been doing birds for a very long time. And we sold the eggs kind of on the side. But I started, I opened up a plot and I started doing a lot more with the veg and started putting together like boxes on the side and selling them. I took a lot more classes, extension classes, and at some point I was really moving forward. I started selling, you know, eggs, the broilers on a larger scale. And then I started the CSA back in 2021, and it really started to take off. But then I had to back up. Things
Mm.
changed. One of my parents died, and my responsibilities changed. But so I really picked up with the birds and the broilers, and we've done turkeys for years as well. And I just kept going. And at some point back in 22, I quit my day job, and this is what I've been doing full time.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm also curious, like, why chickens? I mean, I know that you have some other animals as well. Was there a specific draw to chickens, or how did
You
that
know,
kind of take off in some way?
well, I'm, I guess I love doing plants, but I've always been an animal person. I was a critter kid. I had
Mm.
like lizards and snakes and um, bunnies and all kinds of things as a child. And so as chickens seemed like, I mean, they provide so much when you're talking about like the farming aspect. I mean, there's protein there, there's eggs and meat, and they're fairly easy to raise, and you can learn about them pretty easily. You can raise them in small spaces, so they were an easy place to start. And they provide so much, and they're actually kind of interesting creatures. We raised a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
animals. My kids were doing the 4-H thing, so we've done almost everything. But the chickens, they've kind of stuck with me. I've been successful at them, quite successful, and I've always been intrigued by things. I like to try things and prototype. I went to back in 2018, I think it was, the county put together um, a seminar on pasture poultry, which I thought was interesting. And I
Mm.
didn't understand how you could do pasture poultry in San Diego when we don't have like green pastures like they do in the Midwest. But what I discovered
Yeah.
was we get our green pastures in the winter, like back in the Midwest, they're under snow and their chickens are all inside anyway because they can't live out in those conditions. And I'm like, let's
Mm.
just flip. And so I started experimenting and
Mm-hmm.
prototyping with that. And I think that's that was the intrigue, trying to figure out how to make that work out, the systems. And I've been working with that over the years and perfecting and, just watching it get better and better. And management, all of that is just, it's all part of it, figuring it out. And at some point I started, the economics, trying to figure out how to make it pay for itself. Um, one of the biggest costs is feed. How do you have cheaper feed? Because that's a big input. And I went down that rabbit hole to try to figure that out. And what I figured out is, at my scale, unless I have thousands of birds, I can't do it cheaper because I can't buy feed in the
Mm.
quantity that I can really get a price break. And feed, once you
Yeah.
crack that grain, after about 3 weeks, you start to lose the nutritional value. So if you buy 5 months worth of feed, after a month or two, it's really degraded. So what I figured out in the process is I can't do it cheaper, but I can do it better. And so I went
Mm.
down that hole, and that's what I do now. I order all my grains, all my constituents, and I mix and grind everything. And it's all different based on the different birds that we have, the different types of birds, different stage of life. I even change it seasonally. So that was kind of a thing that I got into and I've learned and perfected along the way. And I think
Yeah.
they're interesting. They're things that keep me like really interested. I guess farmers are like engineers. We're problem solvers. And I like
Mm-hmm.
doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that is so true.
I,
Farmers are
it
problem
is.
solvers.
And the other thing, chickens you can raise in smaller spaces. We have 5 acres here, but I don't get all 5 acres. My husband gets some of that. So I have a couple of acres that I raise the birds and I rotate them on pasture. And I'm always experimenting with stocking density and cover crops, what to bring in behind them. So, and I can do a fair number of birds on that property as long as I manage it properly. And that's harder to do with
Mm.
like something larger like beef cattle or something like that. Um, they take more space to do it sustainably and regeneratively. That's probably why we really focus on the chickens. The broilers, especially, you know, that type of meat is really hard to get locally. A lot of people aren't doing it. And people, I would say the feedback people they really love the eggs and they really love the meat. And
Mm-hmm.
there's like a lot of satisfaction in providing something like that. I've seen this property transform. It used to be a concrete house on a dirt lot, 5 acre dirt lot, and it doesn't look like that
Mm.
anymore. And every year, the pastures that the birds in look better and better. Like the transition, plants that were out there, the weeds, the annuals they're transitioned into different types of grasses and forbs. And um, I mean, that's the birds. That's the fertility that they brought in.
Yeah, that's huge. There's like two parts that you just were speaking about that I kind of want to pull out, and one is the feed. I think is such an important conversation that most people don't know and have a lot of questions about, especially that understanding of pasture raised poultry and that there is also supplemental feed that's required. I feel like most people don't know that, and that's a big part of the expense that goes into raising chickens also. But I was curious if you could just talk to that process a little bit more around what does that really mean and like what does that look like when you're raising chickens on pasture and you're still providing them with supplemental feed?
Yeah. So raising them on pasture. So the whole idea with pasture raised animals is that you're you're moving them across the land in such a way that it's, you're improving the quality of the land by doing that, and you're maximizing the health of the animal. So you have to do it in such a way that it works for both. For us, we move, so our broilers, we move them every day. So we move them from one plot to the next every day. Broilers grow a lot faster, so they poop a lot. They put a lot of nutrients on the land, and you don't want it concentrated too much. So you've got to keep them moving.
Mm.
And you don't want them in that either. You want them on fresh ground. Nobody wants to live in filth. And then as far
Mm-hmm.
as the layers are in a much bigger area. So we have mobile coops. They're like little Quonset huts, and they have roosting bars inside them. They use those at night when, chickens are natural roosters. They want to perch on something. And so they go and they want to be protected. And so it's very easy at night. They go into these mobile coops, they perch on the roost, and we shut the doors. But in the daytime, they go outside. We open the doors, their feed is out there, they spread around. It used to be I didn't have anything out there. I would just open them up and they'd cruise around the pastures doing their thing. And then, but at some point, a few years ago, like 3 or so years ago, the hawks came in, the crows left for whatever reason, and the hawks
Mm-hmm.
came in. And when they did, they just saw a supermarket. And I lost over 100 birds within about 5 months,
Oh my
which
God.
I was smaller at that time. That was like a big chunk of what I had. So I had to do
Mm-hmm.
something about that. And I was trying to figure it out. I looked at dogs. I did a deep dive into livestock guard dogs. A good dog takes about 2 to 2.5 years to train um, effectively. And I didn't have that long. I was losing so many birds. I had talked to a lot of people. I'm on this American Pasture Poultry Producers Association has a thread, very active, and I was discussing people, my issues. And one of the things that came up was geese. A couple of people were using geese as guard geese, and that
Mm.
seemed a lot more reasonable. So the next year, I ordered 8 goslings and put them in with those new birds that I was raising. And so they are grown and they live with the birds. We have 4 groups of birds out there and 2 geese in with each group. The thing about the geese, though, they do a great job with aerial predators and discouraging them, but they only work if the birds are with them. And if the birds are spreading out all over the place, inevitably you're going to have birds that aren't by the geese. So we had to change up operations such that we had to keep the birds with the geese. Now I use poultry netting, electrified poultry netting that go around each of the groups of birds. Each, we call them schooners, the mobile coops. So each of the schooner groups has their own netting and they have 2 geese in with them. And the electrified netting isn't to
Mm.
keep predators out, it's to keep the geese in, or keep the chickens in with the geese. So in the daytime, they spread out, they dig, they make holes, they eat, whatever they can find, whether it moves or doesn't move, including field mice. They're pretty prolific hunters, but and then they go in at night. So when we move the birds, and we move them every week, we have to move the fences as well as the coops, the schooners. And it takes a fair amount of time to do that. So the cost is labor as well as feed now because we
Mm.
changed our systems to do that. You know, I there are other methods for doing it. Some people keep much larger schooners and they keep the birds inside those schooners the entire time and they just move the whole thing and they move the birds. Our fields are smaller. They won't really accommodate those larger schooners. I do like having them out, and I'll be honest, since I've introduced the geese into the system, I have only had one absolute confirmed kill of a bird inside the fence where the geese are. So after
Wow.
3.5 years, I feel like that's really successful. The birds are, you know, they're out on the landscape. So they're moving around, they're active during the day, they're eating whatever they can find out there, and they're out in the fresh air and the sunshine. So they're living their
Mm.
good bird life. I kind of liken it to, because I talk to people, I go to the farmers markets are great for interfacing with people. And you think about it, it's like the difference if you had a human living, like working at a computer in a dark room all day, eating like junk food, or you have another human working outside, eating really good, healthy food in the fresh air. I mean, which one do you think is going to feel better and probably be healthier? Diet and lifestyle are like they're important for animals as well as people. And so, you want
Mm.
healthy animals. You want a good lifestyle for them. You want good diet for them.
Yeah, and I didn't know that one about geese with chickens. I had no idea that they could be good guards against aerial predators. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, well, I didn't know it either to start, but I do now. And another fun fact about the
Hmm.
geese that I didn't know in the beginning was these geese will live as long as your guard dog. Their lifespan is between 12 and 20 years. So the geese that I
Oh
have
wow.
now, I'm going to have for quite a while. So what that means to me is it's worth training them and socializing them. So I don't want my geese eating my
Hmm.
workers. So I've been
Yeah.
working really hard to socialize everybody to each other. And we've been really successful, especially in the recently. So yeah, it's I know it's really tough when you have workers that are afraid to get around them. It's because the geese are like, not all of them are that way. They're all individuals, but some of them. I have 2 that I call Beavis and Butthead, and they live up to that reputation.
Oh.
So yeah, we've been really successful with that as a form of predator control. And then the daytime, I don't have trouble with the larger predators because at night the birds are locked up, and in the day the 2 bird fields surround a field of llamas, and llamas and the canine are kind of a natural enemy, and we just don't have the coyotes here in the daytime. I know a lot of people do have issues with that, but we haven't. Knock on wood. And they're there at
Hmm.
night. I mean, you can see the fecal material, but the birds are locked up at night.
Well, that is good. And so you had also spoken earlier about, you mentioned systems and like your interest in
Yes.
systems and kind of understanding systems, especially in this context. And I feel like the space that you have and just your farm is a really good example of the way that a farm can function in this holistic setting where you have like the animals that connect with the soil and enhance the soil life, and you also have the veggies, and there's like these interconnected systems at play. Could you just share a little bit about kind of some of the systems that are operating in your space and like how you understand that and how all of those things kind of connect together just for someone who maybe wouldn't know how to see it in that way or doesn't fully understand it in that like holistic lens?
Yeah. So we're a diversified farm, which means we do both plants and animals. So we do raise animals across the landscape and we do the plants too. We have a market garden area and our first broilers of the season. They start off in a brooder where, they're baby chicks, they need to stay warm. But then they get big enough, they can handle the changes in temperature and we take them outside and we put them in basically they're coops, mobile coops, but they're smaller than the schooners. And we start moving them through the veggie beds. And like I said, we have to move those guys every day because they will overload a piece of ground pretty quickly. Um, but the
Mm.
schooner or the tractors they're called tractors, chicken tractors for the broilers, and those I built so that one tractor will move over the width of two beds, and so we'll just move them through the beds during that first batch and then we process them. We clean everything off as far as get everything out of, and then um, we use the harrow and just kind of mix all the material in the soil and water it in. And about usually that's in March-ish, February, March, and we plant some of our later season crops through there. So we need to have a separation because it's raw fecal material, and we have to be careful about how we do it. So when we rotate the crops through, and we rotate the different families of crops through the different plots that we plant on, we don't plant our roots and our greens in the places where we just moved our birds through. It'll be things that are
Mhm.
up above the soil, like especially the nightshades. And we don't harvest those till later in the season. But it's crazy the birds moving those birds through that area. It's like it provides nutrients in that area for like a really long time. Usually like later
Mhm.
in the season, start doing some foliar feedings with like some of the nightshades, and we won't have to do that until the fall because there's just so much in the soil.
Mm.
So I like to think of it as, kind of an ecosystem. We really try to feed the soil. So the soil microbes can feed the plant. So versus putting like liquid fertilizers, you're trying to feed the plants directly because you're breaking all the nutrients down into aqueous form so the plants can take the nutrients up. When you're feeding the soil, you're feeding the microbes so the microbes themselves can feed the plants and provide those nutrients. So, providing the nutrients to build the soil and the soil organisms, that, you know, that is what we try to do early in the season, and it provides a bank, kind of like a savings account, so that later in the season, as the plants become more needy, they have something to withdraw. And it provides, it's organic material. It does a lot. And then out in the fields, I just love the way the fields look in the spring, especially if they're just getting better and better out there. So there's a lot of satisfaction that I get from that.
Is there something specifically you would say has maybe helped you the most in either starting your farm or starting the farm as a business?
Boy, you know, it's the lessons that you learn along the way. It's not grow it and they will come. Um, you know, First you have to learn how to do it, and then it's a farm, being able to grow, being able to build, being able to do things. That's super, super, super important. I mean, that is what you do. But having a business it's like, that's another part of it. And if you have a farm business, you have to have both. And I feel like that's been like, I think the toughest part of the journey is because I didn't grow up with a business background and my family they weren't business people. So I just didn't have that experience. And so it's been that's probably been the steepest part of the curve, is learning the business part of it along the way. The journey, as
Mm-hmm.
far as the farming part, is something that just kind of, I feel like a lot of that is problem solving and issues that pop up and trying to figure out how, to optimize, you know, the system itself, learning the animals, learning the plants. Those are things that, I feel like we have a passion towards. And so we're more driven. The business part of it, if you don't have that background, can be very discouraging, because you just don't have the base to start with. And so
Yeah.
I did the farming business parts of it after I started the farm, which, there are a lot of things I would have done differently with record keeping and that kind of thing, but I just didn't know. And now
Mm-hmm.
I do. And I've been working with that, and my business has been growing. And it's been growing in the right direction. I've stopped
Mm-hmm.
losing money and I've started making money. I realize I now know that I'm making money. Before, I had no idea what I was doing or where I was. So it's that part
Mm-hmm.
of it has been a journey, and it's a newer journey that I've been on and struggling with. But the two are so closely linked. I mean, you can't expand you can't grow more if it's not working financially. We talk
Yeah.
about, sustainability, and sustainability is the land and the community, but it's also financially. Otherwise, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a business. So,
Yeah. Is there anything that you would recommend to someone who is newly starting out or wanting to get into this space and maybe wants to have their own business as a farm? Is there some advice that
yeah,
you would give to them?
I would, if you can, get into a program. Get into a program that's an incubator program, that and start small and start organic, like with what you
Mm-hmm.
have. But I would say get into a program that helps you understand both, and takes you through that. And don't don't go into it with the idea that you're going to be done in 3 months, because this is a lifelong process, and there's a lot of moving parts. I've been doing it for quite a while now, and I'm not anywhere close to knowing everything. There's so much left to learn. And there are so many improvements around me that I can see that I need to do. So it's really easy to jump in and get over your head really quick. Would say start small, get into a program, learn the business end of it, learn the farming end of it, get mentors through that, and then you have a support system. So then
Yeah.
when you're like a farmer, we have a tendency to be out by ourselves a lot without a lot of other people around. And that's just not a great place to start. Network, use people, connections, learn. I can't emphasize
Mm-hmm.
that enough. And there are a lot of great programs around now.
Yeah.
So do it. I love what I do, and I love the people that I'm in this space with. The community is really important, and the community are your fellow farmers, but they're also your customers and the people you interact with. Great space to be. But it's really easy to get
Yeah.
overwhelmed in the beginning, and you don't need to. There's a lot of us out
Yeah.
there that like to talk and like to teach, and we want to pass on
Mm-hmm.
information. Take advantage of us.
Take advantage. There you go. You heard it first right here. Yeah. Well, as we just start to wrap up our conversation today, is there anything else that you would like to speak to that we didn't speak to? Or is there anything maybe that you would like to leave the listeners with today?
You know, I think what I want to leave the listeners with is what I basically really what I just said. Find your niche, find out what it is that really grabs you. And that's whether it's like in the farming community or wherever it is you want to go. But find your niche, what really grabs you. You know, drink the Kool-Aid and but drink it with the people that are around. I mean, life is it's so much better if we share it. And there are
Mm-hmm.
things that we can do and spaces that we can get in that can be really solitary. But I think a lot of what we do doesn't have to be that way. And, you know, learn and share and, you know, experience and do it with people.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on the podcast today and for sharing your time and your voice and your insights. I'm really grateful that we got to do this conversation and share this time. And I'm also really excited to get to come out and see your space because I haven't seen it in person yet.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you and the 22 other people that you're going to bring with you. It'll be fun.
Yep, it's going to be good.